welcome to episode 7. I am one of your co-hosts, Amanda Knox.
And I'm Carter Brown.
And we are so excited to be here with you today. Well, boy, do we have a story for you. We're changing things up a little bit too, and we've decided, you know what? We had this itinerary or curriculum, if you will, that we were planning on going by, and we noticed it was defeating us. So before we get into that, we just want to say thank you so much for sticking with us. This is our lucky number 7 episode. Lucky number 7 episode. Thank you so much for continuing to watch and supporting us and showing us all the love. It means more than you know to us. I feel like we've been handed every obstacle in the books when it comes to doing this so far, which means our message is clearly powerful because something is trying to prevent us from sharing it, and we are just not going down that easy. That is not who we are.
Well, or it was not necessarily, yes, it can be that, but also the fact that what we were trying to talk about yesterday was just not it. Like,
it wasn't it for us. No, it was so funny how it all worked, because after episode 3 or 4, we were like, we have to make sure that we don't turn into another self-help podcast. There's so many self-help podcasts. You know, how do we do this? We really tried to plan accordingly. And then it just was getting so complex into the mathematics and the physics and the fractal reality of things in a way that we were discussing coherence and bioenergetics and things like that. And that's great. And we're going to get into it eventually. But I would love to get into that stuff with professional guests that understand that kind of stuff and speak on it, and it's their livelihood and not stuff we're regurgitating through what we've researched. Because at the end of the day, this entire podcast started from personal experience and personal stories. And Carter and I, when we get together and we talk about things, every time we talked, it was so profoundly impactful. The lessons we're both walking away with, we're like, we need to share these lessons with people. And, you know, it was wild because yesterday we sat down. And when I tell you, it didn't feel right. I even paused it and I said, does this sound right? And at first Carter was like, yes, but then 30 minutes in, her internet stopped working. She got off. She couldn't get back on.
Somehow it lost the recording on your end, which it has not done that before, because I've like closed out of filming and it's been fine on your end, but somehow something weird happened.
And I double checked it, and we literally had 3 videos. One was 1 second, one was 3 seconds, and one was 4 seconds. And I'm like, what? So we had all this, and it's funny because I had a gut feeling that we shouldn't be talking about what we were, but I was like, let's just keep going.
Honestly, I was like thinking about getting to my part in that episode and like sharing the examples and personal things that happened in my life than this. And I was like getting anxious because I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like something doesn't feel right to this. So the fact that we were both feeling this and then all that happened, I was kind of reverting back to old ways, being like, oh my gosh, she's probably really upset with me and this and that. And I was reverting back to old ways. And so I finally had to call her and be like, are we good? Like, should we take a break? Like, what's going on? And she was like, I don't think that we should do that. And I'm not upset with you. Like, please take that and know that this was not your fault. Like, you didn't purposefully turn your internet off. And this is why I'm at my parents' house, because I was like, I'm not chancing this again. I don't think I could handle that. Plus, we don't have any more time in this week to get this episode out. So we were like, we got to get this.
The realizations that we came to, it ended up spiraling into what our episode's going to be about today. And that's really, really big, because we were at a point yesterday where I wasn't upset at all. It was such a divine sign for me to be like, that is not actually, like, you knew you weren't supposed to talk about that, so I like had to prove it to you, and I had to force you out of that moment into something that our whole thing got switched to. The conversation we were having on the phone was triggers. We had been really triggered by things, and that moment triggered Carter to revert to old thought processes, even though it wasn't true. I mean, I wasn't for once mad. Honestly, I was relieved, because I was looking at it going, okay, this didn't feel right. Like, this didn't feel right. I can shake this off. We can reevaluate. There was a moment where we're like, we have to gain clarity, because here's the thing. Also had a moment of comparison. And comparison, as we know, is the thief of all joy. And I was comparing us to other podcasts, and I was going, well, we don't have this kind of intro, and we don't have this, and we don't have that. And it's so hard to work between both of our really busy lives. But at the end of the day, we both were like, this is a hobby. Like, we're not getting paid to do this. We enjoy this. And we have messages that we feel inclined to share. And so then there was a moment where we're like, do we take time off? Then we were both immediately like, no, we cannot do that. We've got to get to the base of why we are here and really go from there. But we're being vulnerable and opening up with you guys about this because, just because we've done the experiment doesn't mean we're perfect. There are a lot of things, and something that I realized, I've talked to a lot of people the last couple weeks. I really want to mention again that Carter does not have access to the Instagram. Unfortunately, it is not her fault in any way. It is Meta. When I tell you, it is absolutely Meta's fault. There's just no way around it. But no matter what we do, but I've had conversations on the back end through stories, and a lot of people have talked about, oh my gosh, this has changed my life so much. But we're talking about, triggers keep being brought up. And something I personally notice, I feel like the more you grow in this understanding of, all right, your thoughts create your own reality, you're going to be presented with things that trigger you more and in different ways until you get past that cycle. And then it's almost like, okay, here's more triggers. It doesn't seem right, but we're going to get into that today. And that is what the entire episode is going to be about, because I have been somebody that was very easily triggered. And as I've personally grown and evolved in my understanding spiritually and the nature of consciousness and all of those things, I've looked at it as these are lessons. These are lessons for things I have not mastered. And once I can master that, I will bring a new piece to my life. And every single time I feel like I master a trigger, and here's the thing, at the end of the day, is any human mastering a trigger? No, we're just getting better at our responses to it. I just feel a massive wave of peace wash over me every time.
Well, for me, so triggers, it shows me something that I need to see within myself, that clearly my subconscious is responding in some type of way and getting my conscious to be aware of it. And I was talking about this in my cohort about emotions and feelings, and triggers trigger an emotion and a feeling. We should treat emotion and feelings as direct communication from God. Like, that is literally hey, this is making you feel some type of way. You should maybe try and wonder why you're feeling that type of way. And the antithesis of a trigger, which my sister actually sent me a screenshot of this, and she said, I don't know who coined this, but they called it a glimmer, when something gives you joy and when something sparks like an excitement within you. And I love that antithesis because it is any situation can cause a glimmer or a trigger. And it's about figuring out why that brings you excitement and happiness. And also, why does that cause you frustration, anger, annoyance, bitterness, envy, jealousy, whatever it might be. Turning into yourself and wondering, why am I responding in this situation like this? And asking God directly. Some people always say oh, you need to go to therapy to realize why you're doing this and this, that, and the other. You can literally ask God why you be doing something, and it will come in your brain. Because let me tell you, I have a really interesting trigger to share with y'all. I used to be so triggered by ketchup. Okay, I'm telling you, literally, I would not touch a single food if it had ketchup on it. And this was well into my 20s, from middle school through high school and in college. And I did not understand why I had this response to ketchup until someone was like, I bet something happened to you in childhood that makes you feel that way. And I was like, that's weird. Okay, that's an interesting thought. So I decided to ask God, why don't I like ketchup? This is weird. I want to get over this. I want to be able to accept a hamburger that already has ketchup on it and be okay to eat it. And little did I know, I shortly thereafter got the download from God why this happened. When I was in 6th grade, I was at a dinner with 2 people in my grade and all their families. They had multiple siblings and their families, and we were at this huge table, kids at one end, parents at the other. And let me paint the picture for you. The older siblings were the hottest people in the grade. You were oh my gosh, I'm sitting at a table with that person. Yeah, real hot, real intimidating. And you're 11, 12 years old and you're just googly eyes. Well, I was very gullible growing up. And someone told me at this dinner that if you put salt on ketchup, it rises. And I was like, no one ever told me this. Yeah, sure, I want to experience this. So they get a little bread plate and they're as soon as we pour this salt on top of the ketchup, you got to put your hand right over to feel it rise up. And so they squirt the ketchup. They put the salt. I put my hand on, covered in ketchup, covered. And I never once remembered that until I asked God, why don't I like ketchup? And as soon as I made that connection, I was able to get over this fear of ketchup. and I was able to have food that had ketchup on it. I'm not going to willingly eat ketchup now, but I will say I do not have this like visceral reaction to ketchup anymore. And so as little as an example as that, but that's what our subconscious is accepting and programming when situations like that happen, which then translates to your conscious of, well, you just don't like ketchup. But you're not going to know why, because that's deeply embedded in your brain somewhere, because that situation that happened with the ketchup and the salt was one of the most embarrassing things that has ever happened to me in my life. But I never remembered it until later.
You know what's crazy? I had something very similar with milk. I've never liked milk. In fact, I hated anything dairy, cheese, anything. No queso. I still do not like milk. But it was because when I was little, I was in elementary school and I remember staying the night at a family member's house. And I'm not even going to say much more than that. And I remember they were definitely a family that they made you sit at the dinner table and eat everything off your plate. You are disrespectful if you do not. I'm talking drink. So I was given 2 pieces of pizza and an entire glass of milk. Good. Now, my parents never forced me to eat all my food. And also, I'm a small human being. There is not a lot of food that I need or can fit in my body. And I remember I ate it all as best as I could. And then she told me I could not get up unless I drank the entire glass of milk, to the point where I had cried, waited an hour. She's on the phone with my mom. I'm crying to my mom, please come pick me up. She didn't come pick me up. I remember gagging and throwing up in the milk and then being told I can't waste it. I never finished that milk, but I have never liked milk. And like even the smell makes me sick. But when you think about that, like, you know how we talk about the generational trauma and the mindset, these are things like your triggers can come from random moments that little things spark that remembrance of. Like you telling me your story with ketchup made me realize, oh my God, that's why I freaking hate milk. That having that visceral reaction to milk, I could probably pinpoint those reactions to almost anything I dislike in general.
Well, and triggers usually are developed in childhood because we're not allowed to experience the emotion that's in that situation. We're either told to stop crying or get over it or you're okay. In the moment with the ketchup, I was too scared to feel embarrassed, so I held that in. Like I was already embarrassed and I couldn't like cry the way that I wanted to, you know, because then that would be further embarrassing. God on her, you know, you think about it, your mind spirals. And so I don't want to get into our next episode because we want to talk about that with childhood then, but really that's where it stems. Like really your triggers are established when you're in childhood and are deeply embedded in your subconscious.
I will say it's so funny that this episode comes at the time that it is because I've noticed a couple things. I've held it in, but I've been a lot more triggered personally lately. But holy hell, are you guys not seeing? I feel like everybody and their mother is so dang triggered right now. Everywhere you look, somebody's doing some kind of mock video or talking crap about other people or just something in those lines. And then there are people rebuttaling it. It's just like a back and forth, you know, people playing tennis with their triggers. Like, I'm triggered by you doing this. And it's like, wait, but why?
Yeah.
But why are you triggered by that? Like, let's genuinely get into that, you know? And I was starting to think about it because somebody made a comment there's something about spring and warm weather, like people finally coming out of their seasonal depression that like triggers them. Does springtime and your nervous system create some kind of like new awakening in you? So I actually looked it up and it is a thing, by the way. My question was, is spring energetically linked to being more triggered? And the answer was yes.
Oh my gosh.
It's called the thaw after winter, where nervous systems are coming back online. There are hormonal shifts, comparison season, social reentry, all those factors. And I was like, oh my God, it makes so much sense because people have been hiding and wrapping themselves up all winter. And then, you know, there are those of us who are like, let's take our clothes off and get in the pool. It's summer, I want to wear, or it's spring and summer, I want to wear as little as possible. And it's watching people's insecurities come out and then us learn, like, there's just so many factors. And I feel like for me, and I said I wouldn't even bring this up, but, you know, there have been situations constantly arising that have triggered me for the past year. And, you know, and it keeps coming up. And I'm like, what could the lesson be here? Genuinely. Like, I am going to be honest, I am stumped. And then there was another situation where I was triggered by something and I had to sit. And I sat with it within for days before saying anything. I wanted to just say all the things. I wanted to confront the person. I wanted to do all these things. But instead I sat and I talked to my husband and he said, I want to tell you something. Your feelings are valid for you to be upset. But at the end of the day, what you're triggered by is somebody doing something. And that something is a projection of their own insecurities. And that hit me. Because I realized a lot of things that have triggered me or fall back to that I see, it's not me. It's a projection of their insecurity. And I'm seeing it almost as the lesson that I needed to learn about holding space and empathy for that person going through that extreme insecurity.
Because maybe at one point we were that insecure.
Oh, I'm sure.
Ourselves, yeah.
I'm absolutely actually positive of that. I mean, how are we not, you know?
Well, it makes me think about when I realized something that would have triggered me didn't trigger me anymore. And I might have mentioned this on the podcast before, but I know I've shared it with you. I was working out once at the Y and I was on the landing, and down underneath there were these girls that were doing a TikTok video, but they were having so much fun, being really loud, but looking like they had so much fun. And my initial reaction was a smile, was look at them. Look at the fun that they're having together, the memories that they're making. Maybe that TikTok goes viral, whatever it might be. That was my thought process. And then I immediately thought about, this is growth for me, because Carter, a month ago, or before I even tried to change this mindset about being happy and not letting things trigger me the way that they used to, old me would have been like, why are they doing that? They're being so loud. This is not the place for that. You know, this is so disruptive. But that wasn't my initial reaction. So you can overcome things that once triggered you. But it's an effort. It's a choice.
I mean, and it's probably one of the hardest things ever. I feel like something that triggers us over and over again, especially when we don't understand the reasoning. I feel like that's the hard part. We're like, what is the lesson here? I feel like I'm learning the lesson, but at the end of the day, you know, if you're still triggered by a situation, you feel like you've learned the lesson, but you're still triggered, or have you really learned the lesson? That's a really hard pill for me to swallow, because I feel like what more for me in a certain situation, I'm like, what more can I possibly learn? What more can I possibly do? This feels so far out of my hands completely, to where I'm like, I don't understand. But at the end of the day, you know, you're not just living in your environment, you're entertaining. So if you're even remotely feeding into those triggers and those things that frustrate you, it's like an open invitation to invite it back in, and keep inviting it back in. Every time you talk about it, every time it crushes your mind, every time you give it energy, whether it be positive, negative, you're inviting it back in. It's like leaving your door cracked and not expecting flies to come in. And you've got to live on a farm like me. If I leave my door cracked, flies are coming in.
Yeah, you're very anal. Shut the door.
I am. They drive me insane.
I know.
Just like triggers drive me insane, flies drive me insane.
If only you could get over that trigger.
If only I could get over a lot of things. I mean, you know. But
I know, right?
at the end of the day, we are still human. But you know, it comes down to let's go back to more the triggers more, because if you're somebody in a space where you're finding yourself constantly triggered by things, you should really evaluate the people you follow, the people that are in your circle. Are you following people that are triggering you? The sounds you hear. I mean, damn. I was just talked about the other day that the bathroom fan triggers me. It overstimulates me, and it triggers me into an anger and a frustration that I will just be out of nowhere. All of a sudden, I hear that noise. Oh my God. I gotta turn it off. Why did somebody leave it on? Why does it frustrate me so bad? I don't understand. But, you know, you looking at that and the colors in your home and the mess or the chaos and all of these things, I mean, they all add up, and they can even make triggers that shouldn't be anything that much worse, I feel like. And when you're constantly immersed in high stimulus stuff, if you're constantly overstimulated, if you're a mother, right? Mm-hmm. In those fast-paced environments, and you're scrolling your social media a lot, and you're in a lot of group chats. Okay, this obviously sounds very similar. You're in a lot of loud spaces, or even a chaotic home, aka you're a mother. Your system is naturally dysregulated, your nervous system, and without you even realizing it. It's like having static on the radio, but you want silence, okay? And I want to reiterate that, like, that doesn't mean anything's wrong with you, that you have all this going on and you're naturally triggered more easily, but it is something that if you can just like take that time, it's like trying to sit with something like April went over in episode 3, sitting with something before reacting, letting those, triggers need to be the same way.
To have the pause.
Yeah. To have the pause.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we can tie everything back in.
Well, so let me tell you about a situation that happened recently where I was triggered. So I was having some back and forth with a friend and it was like not going so great via text. And I was like, hey, why don't we take some time and we'll talk about this again like next week. Well, she proceeds to call me. And I am immediately triggered back to when I was a child and say I did something wrong or, I messed up or whatever. I was always forced to talk about it right away. I was forced to apologize about it right away. I was never really given much space to let the conviction about what I just did come to me naturally and want to apologize on my end for what I did on my own terms instead of being forced in it. And I'll tell you what, when I answered that call, I did not handle that conversation very well. And I was triggered because I felt like I was forced into resolving a situation that I did not want to resolve right then. I needed the space. I needed the pause. And I had to then go back and further apologize to this friend and be like, I'm sorry for the way that I handled that. Like that, you did not get me at my best, but let me explain to you why. And in the future, we can, handle these things differently. And that for me was like such huge progress to have seen that through, being able to see the trigger right away, see why it caused me to be triggered and course correct and know what I'm going to do next time. I'm not going to answer the phone next time. I'm going to be like, hey, I hear that you want to talk right now, but right now I can't. And I don't need to be concerned about how the other person is going to take that. If they have some type of way about how I need to handle a situation, then that's on them. That's their trigger,
I mean, but every time you're triggered, it's your soul trying to teach you something. And then I feel like for you in that moment, it was teaching you, like you said, it triggered you based off of X, Y, and Z. And so it's now kind of a lesson. It's funny to watch things go tenfold. Come back into things. I mean, there's somebody talk to me some type of way that triggered me in a way that reminded me of how my parents talked to me. I don't even remember the situation, but this wasn't that long ago. And I said, and I know I've had this conversation with Chris too. I literally cannot remember. I just had this conversation with somebody. I don't know. I don't remember who, where, why. Could have been a dream. Doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, if you can pause and you have the ability to understand, like, hey, the way you're speaking to me is triggering me because this is how I was spoken to as a child, and I didn't appreciate it. And I don't appreciate how you're treating me like a child. You're making me feel less than when I know I'm not. And so we're allowed to have those moments. I think, honestly, we look at triggers as punishments. Think they're not. I think they're like presents and gifts and things where there's so many lessons we can learn from each trigger. Like, they're such beautiful lessons. They really can be. Like being able to step back and something that could trigger you use it as a moment to have reflection and actually develop empathy from it. And with that comes peace. And then you're no longer triggered by that person or that situation that made you feel that way. Does it make your feelings invalid? No, it doesn't. And I want to reiterate that just because you're triggered and you're realizing it's a mirror or a lesson, it does not mean how you're feeling is invalid. And I'm really grateful I had that conversation with Chris the other day because he was like, your feelings are valid. But let's dive into the other side of things. Let's think about it from this perspective. And was I able to walk away with immediate empathy? No, I've had to sit on it. I've had to sit on it for 48 hours to develop that. And that's a long time for me. I mean, not as long as it used to be. I could have sat and harped on it for months and months and months. And I even at one point was like, do I say something to this person? And it was just like, well, but why? Like, what would the outcome be? It's not that this person or individual doesn't know these things. You're not going to change anything. At the end of the day, I've realized that there was just this, it's a beautiful understanding of when somebody is doing something that isn't natural to them, but also triggers you. It's a multifaceted thing where you're seeing their lack of stuff play out, and the subconscious mind understands that in every direction, which is a direct reflection of their business.
So I really love that you brought up the fact that what something would have triggered you for months and months and months, and then how that one trigger brought you to like, I was only triggered for 48 hours. That is the growth. Because I had the thought, I'm like, well, I believe I'm going to get to a point where if I'm triggered in a situation and that person is calling me, I can take the 5 seconds that I need to decompress and be able to have that conversation and not be triggered. I believe that the amount of time that you're spent being triggered decreases the more and more you conquer and master the lessons that are coming your way.
I love that. And here's something else that I want to say, because I feel like we can look at anything nowadays and call it a trigger. And you mentioned earlier, trigger is a newer word. It's not even an older word. But there is a difference between triggers and red flags, right? Blatant toxicity, misalignment, and boundaries being crossed are not, in my opinion, considered less like triggers for lessons, right? I mean, they're not.
Yes. No, I completely agree.
There's got to be something deeper there when that happens. A red flag is you're surrounding yourself by somebody who's blatantly manipulating you. And those kind of things, like if they're gaslighting you, your trigger in that moment is very valid. Your lesson, walk away, literally. And then there's like that soul alignment where if you're someone who unapologetically, like me, owns your voice, owns your belief, and somebody tries to come at you and it in that moment makes you feel small and defensive, I want you to realize that it's not about you. It's about them. Reclaim your voice, reclaim your expression. Somebody's insecurities being projected on you are not you. And something it's funny, I'm going to start doing Tip Tuesdays because triggers, it actually is about triggers. You know what? I'm going to read it.
Trigger Tip Tuesday.
I said Trigger Tip Tuesday because I was feeling triggered, but I also realized everybody else was feeling really triggered too. And that I felt like I needed to, oh my goodness, where is it? I felt like I needed to
It was so
talk about
good.
it. Let me find. Okay, I found it. All right, so I had to do, here's the thing. Am I feeling, like I had to sit with this, am I feeling triggered enough by other people's triggers to put this? And I was like, yes, but also I can use this as a lesson because there are so many people that let triggers disrupt their lives, their happiness. I've watched it happen on multiple occasions. And I'm like, here's the thing. At the end of the day, happy people ain't hating and hating people ain't happy. So understand where triggers come from. So I said, you cannot shame someone when you're standing in your own light, only when you're lost from it. That is, happy people ain't hating and hating people ain't happy. That's it, professionally worded, okay? Let's talk about a pattern. That moment when someone feels the urge to criticize, condemn, or tear down how another person shows up in their work, their wellness, their life, parenting, schooling, whatever. Whether it's what they sell, how they speak, or what they stand for. That moment isn't about the person being spoken about, it's a mirror. Criticism is the language of unfulfillment. I think I need to move this so people can hear this louder. Criticism is the language of unfulfillment. You will never see people in alignment that are happy criticize anyone else. If I don't agree with somebody, guess what I do? I ignore it. It's incredible growth. Projection happens when something in us feels threatened or unseen. And judgment, that's fear dressed up as moral superiority. The truth is, someone else's path doesn't have to make sense to you to be valid. Your discomfort does not make them wrong. We all see life through a different filter of our own conditioning. So before labeling someone else something, ask yourself, is this about them or is something in me being activated? Because if you're deeply grounded in your own integrity, your first impulse will never be to tear somebody else down. You'll be too busy building, living, and leading. And if you're not, that trigger isn't asking for commentary. It's asking you for self-awareness.
Yeah, that hit when I read it the first time and hit the second time.
Well, and I even needed to read it. I mean, and I don't really think there's anybody that doesn't need to hear something like that. And that was just, I see it happening on such a profound scale where I was like, what are the planets doing? I had to realize really fast, it is a full moon. And a lot of people responded and were like, it is full moon. Because I was like, gosh, people are like really triggered right now about all the most random things. And
Mind you, hold on. I want to talk about the full moon real quick because if people think,
ahead.
oh, that doesn't cause anything, yes, it does.
Do it.
Because I actually just made a reel about this. I had some severe pain the last week in my leg with the shattered femur. And I realized we had like a 5-day storm. So I was like, oh, it's the storm. Well, I didn't realize the full moon also drops barometric pressure. So it was like a double whammy for me. And as soon as the full moon was done, my pain started to linger. I just had like this aching soreness. And I made a reel about it, talking about I realized my pain was caused by the full moon. And most people would be like, the full moon doesn't do that. Oh, but it does. Because let me tell you this, I have a friend who is a bartender and she goes, I could always tell when it was a full moon because everyone would be acting like a fool. I had another friend that was like, I used to work in a nursing home. Every full moon, the whole nursing home would be off the wall. So to think that it doesn't affect us, it does. It very much does. So just wanted to point that out.
so while you were saying that, I decided to look it up. Are triggers stronger during a full moon? Short answer, yes. Here's why, but from a both energetic and biological lens. And I want to talk about this too because I feel like it is important. I mean, the full moon does cause a lot. It changes the tides and the weather and cycles. That's why a lot of babies are born during full moons. If you don't think
Triggers labor.
something's there, I mean, it's there, okay? The full moon is a time of illumination where everything that's hidden in the shadow is exposed. It's like shining a flashlight into your subconscious. Emotions intensify, old patterns will resurface, and it's so weird how that's working out right now. In general, triggers feel sharper because you're being asked to see what you normally suppress. And in many mystery schools and indigenous traditions, full moons were considered a time of release, purging, clarity. Not chaos, but confrontation with the truth. So it's funny because there's a quote that says, the full moon doesn't make us crazy, it makes us honest. But at the end of the day, when you tie this back to triggers and projections stem from ego, which then I feel like, honestly, we can twist this so many different ways, but I'm going to really quick get into the scientific part of this, that the full moon actually does disrupt melatonin production, which affects sleep quality. Sleep disruption increases emotional reactivity. There was a study done in 2013 in Current Biology that showed people had lower sleep efficiency and less deep sleep during full moons, even in a sleep lab with no visible moonlight. And poor sleep equals increased amygdala activation, that part of your brain responsible for fear, threat detection, and emotional triggers. So in short, less sleep plus more light exposure plus hormonal disruption equals a perfect storm for emotional volatility. And it's always the time of year the time of the month they recommend parasite cleanses. I wonder why.
They're very active.
So while the full moon doesn't create your triggers, it amplifies what's already going on in your body. That's been waiting to be seen.
Wait, that's so crazy.
I know. It says if you're holding on to something in your subconscious, the full moon will make it louder, sharper, and harder to ignore. I thought that was crazy.
That is crazy.
I love stuff like this, honestly.
Me too. Because here's the thing, God created the moon, all right? It's got major, huge purposes. And for us to think that it doesn't, or that we shouldn't look to it to try and have some sort of distinguishability of how to navigate a full moon, that'd be crazy. Literally, how can we say that this has no effect on us when it clearly does, scientifically proven? It does.
I don't want to take away from how incredible the moon is, truly. Could also be a spaceship, who knows? We don't even know at this point, to be honest. So, I mean, not saying I believe it, not saying I don't believe it. I mean, honestly, do I think we landed on the moon? No, but that's for another day. Anyways, I'm going to skirt
bonus
right
episode.
past that. Yeah, we need to start doing bonus episodes on just rants and raves with Carter and Amanda.
Weird ass shit.
Weird ass shit. Well, I want to go back to projection as an ego defense, though, because
the mirror.
Projection as an ego defense, the mirror. Yes, if something feels off in this, your intuition. Let's differentiate the difference between projection and intuition, right? Your intuition is neutral, it's grounded, it comes from the body's deep knowing. Quiet, feels clean. Where projection
feel it
is
in the
ego.
gut.
You feel it in the gut, you know. Projection is ego. It's charged, it's emotional, and it's fast. So, if you get a text that doesn't sit right with you and you immediately want to be reactive and respond, and you're getting hot and you're getting heated and you're responding with emotional intensity, baby, that's the ego. So.
And don't respond right then. Wait till that ego decreases.
Pause. If you're learning anything from this, it's take a pause. You hear that?
Go ground.
No, I'm telling myself.
Talking to you.
Talking to me. I'm only human at the end of the day. I'll have to tell you a really funny story after this, actually. Because you guys, I'm like sweating even thinking about it, but I really got to get it off my chest. I really do.
Wait, what is it?
Do you want to know? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I started a lot of this stuff started, especially in the first episode of the podcast, it started with my neighbor stuff and the lesson I learned from my neighbor stuff.
Here's the thing, you were also triggering her. It was like this dual situation going on.
Yeah, but like I still don't know why. Okay?
I know.
It's just a wild thing. Okay, but I'm gonna skip past a lot of it, but I'm gonna say there was a moment last week where I was triggered because these people came down to the very end of their 15 acres of property, to the very back left corner of theirs, to then see mine, and we're taking videos and pictures of my landscapers. And mind you, we're leveling property. We don't need anything from the county or the state. We're not doing anything wrong. We're planting shit.
You're just bringing in dirt.
It's fucking landscaping, okay? I was so triggered by that because after all this time, I'm like, we have just done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. It triggered my husband really bad that day. He felt heavy. I would love to get the opportunity to have approached him. I'm glad I didn't. Right? I was so triggered that in my mind, I knew I needed to post about it, to ask people what I can do, legally, because at this point, I have felt such a massive invasion of privacy. I live out in the middle of nowhere. I have land, and there are no houses that can see in or around my house. This should not be happening. People shouldn't be walking to the very end of their property to look into my home, my backyard, my safe private space, and I've just felt very exposed is the word I've
to try and get you in trouble.
And in trouble for what? How is
yeah, I know.
I know. Landscaping on my I literally own it. Anyways, so in my mind, I was like, you know what? I can remove the ego out of this, but I still ask for help because I hit a point where I was like, legally, this can't be legal at this point because we've got a peeping Tom recording us. And I don't even know to what extent because it's only when he's being seen. And so, for me, I sat with it, and it's funny because I texted you and I had wrote up this whole thing I wanted to post on Facebook to ask for legal advice. And I sent it to you and you were like, honestly, I think that's not bad, considering the situation. And I didn't do it. I sent it to my husband and said, I'm going to do this. And he said, no, please do not do that.
Of course
and I
not.
said, no, I need to do this. And he's like, why? I said, because I don't know what can legally be done. And I feel like there's somebody out there that has been in a similar situation and can offer us advice. But through him being like, no, don't do that, I stepped back and I stopped giving it energy, and something really funny happened. My beautiful lesson of karma played out. And I realized I didn't need to do that at all, right? But the lesson that I learned was, so when we were in the first phase of our pool building process, our neighbors made a comment that they actually put their fence 2 feet within their property line, and that some of what we think is our backyard is actually their property. And we were like, well, why would you do that? Why have you never told us before? Anyways, and they said it in a way to try to create issues. I mean, they got the county involved, they got the state involved. It was wild. Anyways, long story short, at the time we thought, okay, well, our property line at the very least was the fence. And so we ended up hiring a surveyor and had a surveyor come out. And mind you, there's been zero retaliation on our part for the behavior and the animosity that has been caused, and the chaos and the financial issues that it's caused for us because our neighbors have done this for whatever reason still unknown. But their survey actually showed the opposite. And that was such a moment of how things naturally play out when you don't lead with ego.
Force yourself into
or
it.
projection.
Yeah.
Or force yourself into issues. Because here's the thing, had I done that, had it gotten back to him, he would have done anything in his power to try to create problems, right? And it's just one of those things where if you really look at things, say something is triggering you and something is bothering you, can your reaction actually do anything? Is it going to help or is it going to hurt? And if it's not going to help and you only have the probability of it hurting, why do it at all? step back, let it naturally play out, because at the end of the day, letting it play out will always work in your favor.
And stop talking. So another thing you need to do about when you're dealing with triggers, don't talk about it everywhere you go. Don't talk about it on your social media. Don't bring it to, the dinner table. Don't talk about it to whoever will listen, because you are just amplifying that problem. Yeah, it happened to you with the neighbor thing. The moment you stopped talking about it, majority of the problems went away. And I have a friend who's been dealing with a huge, case with her ex-husband and all this, and she will not stop talking about it. She will not let it go. And it is still going on 5 years later. And I feel like I see a glimmer of hope within her, because I feel like the pieces are coming together that I think if she stops talking about it, the problem will go away. But it's so much of her identity right now that, it's almost completely taken over her conscious mind. And so that is the thing. You let go of the trigger. You let go of what it's stirring within you. Because here's the thing. If you remain triggered and constantly keep that feeling, the next time that you're triggered by that situation or something else, it's going to be an even bigger reaction. And something that you're also going to look back and be like, why did I respond like that? Why did I do that? You have the ability to remove that frustration within yourself by just letting it go. Stop talking about it. A lot of times, I actually saw this reel yesterday. It's this one guy that I follow. This is going off on a tangent, but his account is called Jesus the Living Son. And he literally can control the wind, okay? And he teaches people to do it. It's honestly the wildest thing. And he had this reel of this one guy. It was what you bring your attention to, you attract. And it was this guy filming this thing up in the sky. And he was like, what is that thing? And it's swirling up in the sky. And then you see, he goes, that's a tent. And it swirls and it hits the man as he's recording it. And the caption is you attract what you put your focus on. And I was like, damn, that is so true. If he just if he didn't focus on that, it would have wafted into the different direction. The tent literally hit him in the face. And so that put it into perspective for me. What we are bringing attention to, we are further bringing it back to ourselves.
I feel like we say that all the time, though.
We do.
Every episode. What you think, you attract. You create your own reality with your thoughts, your attention, all of that. Sorry, I'm eating a candy at the same time. We're just gonna do it. But you know what? I think we should flip the narrative on triggers. Because here's the thing, our triggers, again, outside of toxic situations, I think it's possible that triggers are sacred assignments. Really think about it. They're emotional invitations, and if you accept the invitation, you can meet the version of yourself that was waiting to be integrated. Like I mentioned, every lesson that I've learned through a trigger, when I don't react or project, I'm met with immense peace. And so let's go deeper. Let's go deeper on the trigger and mirror understanding, because I genuinely believe that there are people you look up to and admire, that is just a mirror of the potential you have within you. If there are people who trigger you, that's a mirror of your shadow. The patterns that repeat, they're a mirror of your lessons that you need to learn. If you keep getting repetitive triggers over and over and over, I watch a lot of people get triggered at people's weight loss before and afters. And it's funny because when you look at their stuff, it's because they have their own insecurities that they're having to work out, and they're projecting onto these people that have accomplished what they ultimately want to accomplish. And I feel like that goes with anything. The same thing with money and finances. Oh my gosh, I see so many reels. I follow so many farm homestead Instagram accounts because obviously same. And one of the largest issues I see that people have is they're so mad at how these people have spent their money building their dream homes instead of giving it to other people. And it's why does that trigger you? But also, who are you to say that? So
one thing, Gabor Mate, I think that's how you say his name. I absolutely am loving his work. April from episode 3 recommended a book of his, and so far I am really enjoying what I am learning from him. And what he says about triggers is actually, it stems from childhood. It's my parents' cuckoo clock. It's a survival mechanism that in childhood, we experienced something that caused us to either have a reaction, and we weren't allowed to experience that reaction fully because children, for a lot of times, they're not allowed to express themselves. And
I can't wait to get into next episode.
I know. And the next, but like if we told an adult to stop crying, can you imagine that? Mm-mm. I mean, there are some adults that do that, but like I would never tell an adult to stop crying. And you know, that has changed how I parent my kids. I don't tell them to stop having tantrums anymore. Anyway, yeah, I don't want to get too much into that, but it's a survival tactic later in life that, well, in childhood, where you have that reaction, something happens and you feel some type of emotion about it, but you're not allowed to fully express that emotion, you sink that back into your body. Again, your body keeps the score. Your body's going to remember that. Those emotions don't go anywhere. They're just stored until a similar situation happens with you and later in life, and that's brought up, and that's how you react. And the way that he says this is, in childhood, suppressing emotions like rage can be a necessary survival tactic. However, these suppressed emotions don't disappear. They remain with us. As adults, when a situation resembles past trauma, these buried feelings can resurface explosively, leading to reactions that are more about past wounds than present circumstances. So again, this is a projection of what's happening within ourselves. And what I said at the beginning, ask for the clarity on that. Ask, why am I responding to this situation like that? You know, for me, when I used to think that I had to get to point A to point B in the quickest way possible, I didn't understand that, why I was like that. It drove my husband absolutely insane. He's like, Carter, we're gonna get a parking spot. Like, don't, like, calm down. We're gonna sit at our table in 7 minutes instead of 5. Like, it's gonna be okay. And so I was like, you know what? I don't like this about myself. I don't like being triggered like this. Why am I like this? I sat with that with God.
That triggers me too. That used to trigger me
see?
too. Was it because your mom was that way?
We were constantly always going from point A to point B. I lived a really far distance from where I went to school. So we were always having to wake up early to miss traffic to get to school. And then all the sports teams that we played were far away from our house too. So I was always, you know, get in the left lane. We're going to drive in there and get in there. That was the programming that was happening to myself as a child, and it translated into adulthood. And I was so sick of being like that. It caused my cortisol to raise so high that when we would get to our destination, I couldn't even enjoy myself until I came down from the cortisol spike that I had. Isn't that insane?
Wait, is that, I mean,
like, I don't feel that way anymore.
I don't either.
Yeah, because I was like, why? And then I got the clarity about why it happened, because of school and how far away I lived and how we always had to get to point A to point B in a really quick time because I live far away. And once I realized that I just had some sort of subconscious programming in me at a young age, I can deprogram that. And it's a choice. It was literally a choice to be like, you know what, we are going to be late to church today, but that's okay. And I'm not going to let that affect me. No one is taking attendance. No one is saying, oh, I'm going to let God know that I was late to church, you know? No one's going to do that. And so why am I putting this like unnecessary pressure on myself? And once I did that, it completely changed. It has helped me in my marriage so much. He's made a point to tell me, thank you for being so much more patient now. And it's the smallest change that you have to make within yourself, and you can do it. Again, we uploaded some slides on our Instagram this week of like, stop saying that's just the way I am. That's not. You can change that. I know. You know, and for you, like, you are gaining more of that empathy. You used to say, I'm just not empathetic. Well, you have now realized that you can harness that empathy. It's a choice. It's a putting yourself in the other person's shoes. It's seeing the situation from a 30,000 foot view and not thinking selfishly about it. That's all it is. And so for you change that narrative within your brain. You're like, I want to be an empathetic person. I want to be able to, you know, be like, hey, you know, I hear you, and not dismiss that. You have gotten so much better at that. Truly, over the last year, you have totally transformed in that. And I just need to make sure you know that like you really have. And you never did it as a way to, like, your lack of empathy wasn't ever, you know, meaning you trying to be negative. It was just your programming.
Yeah.
It was the lack of empathy you received yourself. And so you just need to gain that reprogramming of how to be empathetic, of how to not stress yourself out.
Well, and then growing up, you know, I went to military school and boarding school, and there are no empathy in places like that. And during the most vital times in my life, I was a gymnast. No empathy in that. During the most vital, malleable times in my childhood, I had no empathy. I didn't even know what empathy was. And it turns out I have so much empathy when I see a dead animal on the road, I cry now, okay? Like, it makes me so sad. And maybe my empathy really is within animals and not as much people, but I'm gaining that. I'm getting there. It is so funny you said that though, because I didn't even realize until you said what you just said that I was the same. I would rush us, and it would fluster me and dysregulate me so much. I couldn't enjoy the things we were going to do, whether it be an event somewhere or dinner. And we've got to drive far to get anywhere here. I mean, you're looking at an hour minimum, okay, to go anywhere decent for dinner or shopping or anything like that, which we do willingly, right? But we're willing to go that distance. It's just, it's crazy when you really start thinking about things like, wow, I have been a person that really lacked patience. And what's funny? I actually had this conversation yesterday with somebody. And it's funny, Carter, because she said she had been working with you, and she was like, I have been dealing with this stuff in my life, and here's what I'm praying for, and here's what I'm doing. And I said, I'm going to tell you something. I said, there's a reason I don't pray for patience, because you want to know why? I'm not going to get patience if I pray for patience, babe. I'm going to get the
situations that cause me patience.
Situations that will create a more patient person. I don't want that. I don't pray for patience. I do not want that. When I used to pray for patience, I was miserable. That was hard. I do not do that anymore. Be mindful about the things you're asking for and that you think you need to suffer to learn the lessons, because I feel like that's another thing. We're really getting this messed up. This human experience is not complicated. I think it's so simple that we actually don't understand how simple it is, that genuinely it boils down to your thoughts create your reality. If you pray for patience and God is going to give you situations to learn patience, that's what you're going to get. If you pray for patience in a way that you're going to be given patience instead of situations to learn patience, you're going to get that. I mean, whatever you believe is what you will receive. That's what it really boils down to.
For me, in that, I would not pray for patience. I'd be like, can I please respond to these situations the right way that I need to in that moment? That's how I would word that prayer.
Wow, that's really good.
Because it's not about it's so much more than patience. There's it's about the mindset of it and the energy that you're putting out and all that. There's so much that goes into play with that. And I don't really want to constantly be presented with situations that are going to be testing my patience. I want to be constantly tested with situations that allow me to get it right. Mm-hmm. And give me the ability to have the pause to gain the patience, not hitting traffic every single day for 4 months straight. But I will say, when I did try and control time, when I did try and learn how to control time, the universe responded, and I was hit by that train damn near every single day for 3 months.
Yeah,
but I knew what that lesson was. So I chose immediately, I'm not getting frustrated at this. I'm going to have patience at this. And I was more inclined to have the patience because I was trying to master a different situation. And so patience goes into that, is a twofold part in that process. I wanted to not feel stressed out about time anymore.
Yeah.
And so gaining patience through that is also, it's a synergistic relationship. So I would rather be able to master time, but also master patience at the same time.
I love that. You know what? I don't even know why this reminded me of this, but I was on a one-on-one for our business recently, and somebody said that they were really triggered at how inconsistent people are that join them in the business. And I said, are you sure it's that, or are you triggered because you're inconsistent how you show up for your business? Yeah. Because when you look at it, it all makes sense, right? We want to put the blame and the frustration and the triggers on everybody but us, right? And that's I think, human nature. We've been a little conditioned to do that. But it's like seeing someone live a soft, slow, peaceful, beautiful life. If that triggers you because you're hustling nonstop, that's not jealousy, that's grief, because you long for something like that. Or you want something like that, or you wish you were raised with something like that. I mean, you can find, you know what, I'm gonna make this up, so I don't know if this is gonna work, but I feel like this could really work. Let's do a lesson a little bit. I want you to, this is specifically, if you're feeling really triggered lately, and if you're not, amazing, love that peace and happiness and joy for you at this moment, but eventually you will be triggered, right? I want you to get a notebook, or even in your phone, when you're being triggered by something, write down what is triggering you.
And the date.
And the date. and I want you to sit with it. And if you cannot naturally come up with why that could be triggering you or you don't know, why don't you ask ChatGPT? I know. Listen, some people have AI reliant problems. There's a way to utilize it smart and there's a way to utilize it dumb. But if you can just be like, hey, I need you to act as my therapist or whatever you want to say, and be like, I am really triggered by this current situation. I would love to figure out, with the understanding of triggers as my mirror, I would love for you to help me figure out, dissolve and digest why that triggers me and what lesson I could need to learn from it. A lot of the times, if you're new to really understanding that triggers, things that are triggering you aren't about the other person, they're about you and what's going on internally. Understanding that, instead of reacting and creating content bashing that person or creating anything, because that's mean girl, bully energy. Like, we don't do that anymore. We're here, you guys. We don't do that. Instead of doing that, figure out why it triggers you and see how it makes you feel, to have those realizations and work on yourself and document the process of it. Because I would love to hear, and please let us know this, because this is very important to us. Once you do this kind of work or lesson, I would love to hear how you feel. Did that peace wash over you once you realized it? How long did it take for you to feel that peace within? Because that's the real key here, is figuring that out. And I feel like, you know, the more evolved you feel you are, and I've got to laugh at it, the more evolved you feel you are, the more opportunities you're going to be shown how not evolved you are through triggers. And they're going to change. And they're constantly going to change, because I feel like, why wouldn't they? We're growing and we're evolving as beings and as souls, and it's a part of the human experience. We're here to learn these things. We're here to evolve. We're here to grow. I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I don't even know who the hell I was 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. I feel like we're constantly given things, everything in our life. Nothing is accident. Nothing is coincidence. Nothing is luck or bad luck, good luck or bad luck. Everything is so divinely designed for you to learn the lessons that you need to learn. And that is something that, like, ancient wisdom really, really, really teaches. You know, I loved this lesson today. I feel like we could keep talking about it forever and ever. And I want to say that that's what our podcast is. This is what it's about. It's not about having this perfect curriculum itinerary situation where we're teaching you all the things, and we want to, and we'll get there. But at the same time, this is about conversation, personal life lessons, personal experiences. It's not polished. It's not always comfortable. But we are going to reveal things that we feel the need to reveal as best as we possibly can. So, you know, go over triggers, do some reflection work this week, because next week, what are we going to get into next week?
We're going to talk about how to raise your children with this mindset and intentionality, so that they don't have to do the reprogramming like we be doing in our adult years.
I mean, it's funny because I was triggered a little bit today. But I was in Pilates this morning, and we were talking about something, and my Pilates teacher goes, somebody didn't know what her thighs were today. And I was just like, she didn't. Yeah, your thighs, like the things between your legs. I don't know really how else to say that. And she was like, when I said put the ball between your thighs, she didn't know what thighs were. And I was like, you know, it's funny because my assistant told me 2 days ago, she said, now, I mean, when you really dive deep in the US, you're supposed to, like, everything needs to be now at no higher than a 5th grade level. So when you're posting on social media, your captions, your reel hooks, all of that have to be at a 5th grade level. And there's a program you can now put it through to make sure it is, by the way. Crazy. I know. And so I said that.
We be dumbing down America.
It's really bad. We're trying to help. We're here for a reason. No, but and then another lady across from me, beautiful. And she goes, this is why I'm glad I never had children. I'm glad I don't have to worry about raising children in a society like this. And I said, it's not like that. I said, it's about how you raise your children. I said, if you can raise emotionally intelligent children that aren't gullible and believe absolutely everything other people tell them, I said, they'll be totally okay. You know, one of my biggest things is that I realized that I've always taught my kids the things I'm teaching you guys. Always, since they were little. I've had this deep understanding of helping my children realize A, have emotional intelligence, but B, realize that most history is fake, but also that they are the creators of their reality. And I've done that since they were little. Camden, my oldest, ever since he was 4 years old, he said he's going to go to MIT and he's going to be a billionaire. And we've just been like, yeah, you are. Yes, you are. And I said, yeah, because here's the thing. I said, Camden, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. You can create anything you want. And we've said this from the moment that they had any understanding. And I've learned some really cool lessons from my oldest son, who's almost 13. And I cannot wait to get into them.
I love Camden.
Cam's, old soul. He's teaching us left and right.
Truly.
We're like, wow. Magical being. But something with that. And the thing this morning, I was like, wow, like I was triggered by this, but also what a beautiful lesson to go from triggers to things we can teach our children, because how nice would it be if we can teach our children and have them understand what triggers mean from a young age, have them have this emotional intelligence, this way about themselves, so that they never have to go through what we do into retraining our brains and learning this as adults. And look what we've had to go through to get here.
Let's get those neural pathways trudged early. And not do it later.
Can you imagine how incredible the next generation will be as adults if we can do that? Anyways, saying that, this was such a great, seamless episode today. So much better than what we originally had planned. I'm so glad.
Yeah. Everything happens for a reason. Again, we could have chosen. I got a little triggered, but I didn't get as triggered as I would. But like, thank God for you that, you kept us grounded.
Because I just knew. Something in me was like, this isn't right. And I want to be excited. When I show up here, I want to be so excited. I want to have an idea what I'm going to talk about, but I don't want it to be scripted. And it's just not as natural and as inauthentic. And I think our fear of not being like anybody else can cause that. But I think when when you step back from the fear and you just lead with authenticity and intuition, look what happens. So, multiple lessons here today. We love you all. Thank you so much for spending another hour of your day with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.